Good morning, afternoon, evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm George Moss again here on the coldest day of the year. Well, maybe not the coldest, but one of the coldest days of the year. We're going to be taping today at 2 o'clock on Thursday. We normally come together with the audience on Monday at 2 o'clock from 2 to 3. But we are marshaling around the weather conditions here in Flint, and 1/4 of the country, 1/4 of the United States is facing this. John, this is a heat wave.
Yeah, and
Al Gore.
and tomorrow and Saturday is supposed to get up from tomorrow through to Saturday. Saturday is supposed to get up like 40, 45, 46, 47 degrees. I mean, that's 100. That's 100-degree shift. That's all close to 100-degree change in weather. But this kind of stuff has happened before, and they're making a big deal out of this. And it's bad. I mean, I'm glad they canceled stuff, okay? I thought that long ago they should have done it. But now it's that they're trying to build this drumbeat, like, look how serious this global change is. Weather change. It's been going on like this for all the time. I'm 55. I've seen instances like this before,
I was wondering if anybody has gone around to Al Gore's house holding up a sign and dare him to come out because they want to smack him up.
Now they're using the broad spectrum climate change. So that covers everything. I mean, if it gets warmer by 1 degree, then they got it covered. If it gets colder by 2 degrees, it's covered. I mean, there's something going on with the environment. We can say that. But I talked to experts in the field, like geophysicists and stuff, and geologists and stuff, and they're saying, yeah, something's going on. But the cause of it can't be categorically declaimed to this way. But they have the science, like you alluded to in the past couple of your shows, about that.
John, I don't know of anything that's going on that hasn't going on in the history of the planet. I mean, what's happening with the climate now that hasn't happened in the past? And this idea that the globe warms and the globe cools, and it goes back and forth. I don't know how that differs from what has happened, throughout history.
Like 10,000 years ago, all the mammoths they're finding in Siberia, frozen, totally, intact, flesh on them and stuff, layers and layers. Okay, they say that there's no evidence these animals starved because they're unearthed they weren't starving and just kept on being forced. It was an instantaneous drop in temperature within, day or so, a couple of days, whatever, and they killed them off. So, I mean, we've seen catastrophic changes. We haven't. Maybe our ancestors possibly did. Obviously, somebody survived it because we're all here. But it was catastrophic. But it's like they've only been collecting data for a little over 100-some years about weather. Now they're saying, we can extrapolate that. If this Earth is billions and billions and billions of years old, 120-some, 130, 100, even 200 years of looking at records that have been kept about is nothing on the radar about how the world functions, and there's going to be extremes. There's been extremes years ago when the Mount Pinatubo blew up there in the Philippines. There was extreme changes. I remember that. So
I think that this article that came out, 3 or 4 days ago, is titled Polar Vortex to Drive Record-Smashing Cold Across Much of Nation. And 1/4 of the country right now is dealing with this polar vortex. And if Al Gore were right in saying that we were going to see a meltdown of the North Pole, in the Arctic area, you would have the icebergs melting and the sea levels rising as a result of the melting. We would have seen some indication of that rather than what we're seeing right now, based upon the predictions that were set up that were projected by Al Gore. In fact, Al Gore had said in 2014, of course, you know how they try to do this. They try to make the projections far enough into the future that they wouldn't have to show any immediate results of what they're predicting. But Al Gore said about 2014, we should see the sea levels rising. And John, if you really remember when Obama was giving his speech in Denver in 2008, when he's running for president, he said that this is the time when the level of the ocean began to decline, And the idea is he's going to come in and we're going to reverse all of this global warming and the trends to save the trends would be reversed, and the attempts to save the planet because we were destroying it by the pollution. We were destroying it by carbon dioxide emissions and things of that sort we're emitting into the air, and somehow there was going to be a lessening of that under the Obama regime. When I think about that, and then I'm reading this article, The Polar Vortex, to drive record-smashing coal across much of a nation, and 1/4 of the United States is now going through this frigid weather, 30 degrees, and then the wind chill factor adding to the cooling. And so I just think we have to get past some of the nonsense that's been projected by these political scientists. I'm not talking about those in the humanities field, political science. I'm talking about these scientists that have politicized the weather and have made a mockery of the science that used to be more independent of the politicians, but now that they've captured these scientists and they are projecting things that are more political than scientific. The polar vortex to drive record-smashing coal across much of the nation, that would not be the case if what they have been predicting were true. And I don't know if we should go out there and demonstrate in front of Al Gore's house or not. But Al Gore, the politician, told us that we would have a warming, and this would in fact cause flooding, and we need to be prepared for the fallout from the globe being warm. We don't see any evidence of that now. And when I was on a radio program making the point that they sold us what they taught long before they talked about global warming and global cooling and all of these other things they're doing now with the science data, a lot of it being manipulated to a certain conclusion. Before any of that happened, we knew that the climate changes based upon the fact that the Earth revolves around its axis, and that while the globe is cooling in one part of the Earth, it's warming in another part of the Earth, and that cyclical change of the weather is something that is in fact beyond man's ability to control. And so this idea that you would go from global freezing, which was what they were saying up until 1977, the globe was going to freeze. And then in 1979, they changed their mind and said that the globe was in fact warming. And when that was not proven by the data, of which I have the charts right here that I've been bringing to the studio for the last couple of months, I have the data that they were pulling from, where the claim is made that 97% of the climate scientists agree that the globe is warming. And I looked at their data, and I looked at the statistics that were being used where they drew this conclusion, and I can tell you by looking at the data that that is not what the data that's not what the data shows. The data does not show 97% consensus. That is somebody is looking at the chart, and it's again another example of figures don't lie, but liars can figure. And what they did was to take a large part of the scientists that had no position on AGW, the average those who are advocating global warming. They took 66% of those scientists and put them on the sideline, didn't count them one way or the other because they didn't take a position, which left 32.6% of the climatologists that were at this conference that did take a position. 66.4% took no position because they didn't have enough data to make a decision one way or the other. 32.6% of the other scientists took a position, and of that 32.6%, 97% of that group took a position there was man-made global warming. But you have to understand the statistics. the statistics is 97% of 1/3 of the climatologists were at the conference. 66% of them were just taken out, and it was made to appear that all the scientists that were there, 97% of them were in consensus about man-made global warming. But I read charts very well, and I can tell you that's not what the charts show. And no scientist worth his salt would make that argument in front of someone that understands how to read the charts as they do. And I know how to read the charts. And I can tell you that this is, laymen run with, laymen that take people's word for it rather than going to the primary source themselves to find out if what they're importing from it is true. We take their word for it because we've not become skeptical yet as a society. Yet we have every reason to be skeptical of what these persons are telling us because the politicians have now captured another part of the society. They captured the climatologists, and now they have politicized these scientific reports. And what they're now saying is a political, these are political conclusions and not scientific conclusions. I can tell you without fearing anyone coming behind this and contradicting it, that the scientists do not make a consensus, 97% of them making a consensus that the climate is changing because of man-made causes, the so-called greenhouse gases, which is supposed to frighten people because when we think about greenhouse gases, we think about gases that would warm the planet. But greenhouse gases just mean that if you're going to have what it means to me, if you're going to have a greenhouse where you're growing plants in the wintertime, you have to have greenhouse gases. Carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas, and you have to import that gas into the place where you're growing the crops, the tomatoes and plants and things of that sort that you're planting during the wintertime, because the plants must have carbon dioxide. So nature has it set up so that we breathe in oxygen, O2, two parts oxygen. We let out carbon, 1 part carbon and 2 parts oxygen, carbon dioxide, CO2. And we take in oxygen and we let out carbon dioxide. The plant takes in carbon dioxide and let out oxygen, and we are working together in harmony and so on. And now they made that a poisonous relationship between human beings and plants. And when I was saying that when they sold at the end of going through global freezing and then going through global warming, and both those being proven to be non-starters and neither one being proven true, because you had this effect at one point, we now have it warming, and we have this freezing that we're into. We're going back and forth. They couldn't say with any regularity and any consistency that the Earth was continuing to cool, and they couldn't say on the other hand that the Earth was consistently continuing in a pattern to warm. So they left global freezing and went to global warming, and then the two could not be sustained because we kept seeing breaks in the cooling effect, and we saw breaks in the warming effect. So they then decided that they would go with what they taught us in those ninth grade science classes, that the climate changes, which we know the climate changes because we talk about the 4 seasons. So it's a political science that we're looking at. And we are now seeing another example of how this political science is being proven incorrect by the fact that we've had this freezing that covers 1/4 of the United States. And of course, it's not freezing everywhere. I had some friends of mine that called me to find out how I was doing because they're down there in South Carolina, in Alabama, and probably California. I don't know about whether or not it's hit the West Coast or not, but I would imagine in California. It's not freezing everywhere. It's just freezing in the places where, and I'll read this again, this headline, the polar vortex to drive record smashing coal across much of the nation. But it didn't say smashing coal across all the nations. It's only 1/4 of the United States. So 3/4 of the United States is not being smashed by this cold front. So you have climate changing here, and it's different than the climate changes elsewhere, and that's par for the course. I don't see anything that we need to become alarmed about. But they have to spread something that out here that creates panic in the population. Because as long as you're panicking over some fabricated crisis, we're not focusing upon what the people are doing as they are doing what? Taking our liberty from us. So we over here with these distractions as if that we are going to burn up. And then before that, we were going to freeze to death. And while we are being made, the alarmists are alarming us about this, we have a continuation of some crazy stuff that's going on right now among our government leaders. And and we're almost on automatic pilot right now. And I'm really beginning to wonder whether or not we can pull back the centers of power to the extent we can maintain the liberties of the United States. Can we maintain that which has made us unique among the nations of the world? And I'm not so sure we can do that given how off the chain things are right now.
It's really weird because nowadays we have a better chance of like exporting our technology and train people to become more, have what we have. So now they want to just flood us with these people from the countries who are really oppressed and all the the economic meltdowns going on. Mm-hmm. And when you see what they did during the Kavanaugh hearings, they lied blatantly. And when they were actually presented with the fact they lied blatantly, there's no remorse shown by the left. Okay, so it just goes. That should be kind of adding to the weight of people saying we should look at what these people are saying because they've lied to us so much already. But no, there's no remorse. There's no guilt. They're just like they're sociopaths. Yes. They can lie blank face into a camera. I mean, even the second accuser of Kavanaugh, for example, made stuff up totally. She never even met him. And it's like now these people are like when you face these type of people, they're not connected issues, but they are in a way because you're looking at the same people who are trying to push this narrative.
Yeah, John, they don't apologize to us. What they do once they've been proven wrong on something, they just go to the next thing and spread other propaganda in another area, and we're supposed to forget what they said prior to. I brought another article I brought to the studio was one that is titled Obamacare Architect. Does anybody remember Jonathan Gruber from MIT? He is the Obama architect. And the title of the article is Obama Architect, and then there's a colon, and it continues, yeah, we lied to the, quote, stupid, unquote, American people to get it passed. And this is an article that came out in 2014. And what is alluding to is that Jonathan Gruber, who came before the American people once he was brought out as the expert. There's another example of these experts. The expert is going to tell us that you could have the government take over 1/6 or 16% of the economy, meaning the health care. The government can take it over, make it run more efficiently and run more cheaply, and cut the costs by $2,500 per paying family, so that the cost of the health care would go down and not go up. And Jonathan Gruber, on tape behind the scenes, was talking about how stupid the American people were to be able to fall for such nonsense. You can actually have a layer of bureaucracy placed on top of the medical costs, and the cost will go down. So you have to think about that for a minute in order to figure out why that is so deranged. For somebody to tell us that you have a medical cost because the doctors are not working free and the nurses not working free, and you have also light and space expenses. You have to have all of the equipment paid for. There's capital replacement necessary. So you have all those costs that are built into the medical delivering of services, and then they tell us that you can put a layer of additional costs. It has nothing to do with the medical costs. These are bureaucratic costs, and the cost of the total package of that, the medical and the bureaucratic, will in fact go down, and it will reduce it by $2,500. And Jonathan Gruber, the architect of Obamacare, was saying behind the scenes, and he was on tape, by the way, having said this, is that the American people are stupid. Because you really have to be pretty stupid to believe that you could do that, and government that doesn't run anything efficiently. And I mean, when I say it doesn't run anything efficiently, I mean there's no history where the government has done anything in its history that's been more efficient that's being run in the private sector. And there's a reason for that. The government does not have to be efficient, not only because it's being run by people that are incompetent. No government on the planet has ever been run in an efficient manner, and there's no history of that ever happening. All government's been run by people that are inept, because the kind of people that go into government.
Look, let's nail this right close to the locality we're in, Flint.
About what now, John?
About government inefficiency and stuff. Mm-hmm. We've had a water crisis going on over 4 years now.
Yeah.
Okay, 4 years. If this was a private company who was motivated out of profit, probably would have stepped up a lot faster. Now, okay, there's a claim that might be legitimate. They would have done a better job covering it up, and we had never known, and we'd still drinking poisoned water. Okay. I doubt that, because I think I think we should have people testing more and more water all the time, even when there's not a crisis. I mean, they've been fudging on the statistics they've been sending out to the Flint area people for years. We've known that now. This came to light. So, but if you had independent groups out there always testing the water randomly, different locations, and they could raise a hue and cry if something was up, going against a private company, they would really change their procedures quickly to avoid lawsuits. Now, the lawsuits now that's going to go on are going to go from to courts. Who's paying these settlements if there is going to be any? It's going to be the American taxpayer anyway.
As always.
So, I mean, if anybody now who's seen what happens here in Flint with the water crisis still wants to advocate to put everybody on the same health care plan, a single payer, they're absolutely, and they have half of their brain removed if they're okay with that.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
John, asking for more of that which has already shown itself to be inefficient and causing these kinds of problems, and we want more government interference or more bureaucracy, as if we haven't had enough of that already. To ask for more of it is kind of like stupid. It's amazing that we would not see the nature of the problem here. How much, we're talking about lead in water, how much lead is in the water in those stores? We go and buy that bottle of water. I use spring water in my home. And how much lead is in that water? And if you say that there's no lead in that water, then why is that true? Why is that water not contaminated? And I know you have the answer, but I'm gonna give you for those that don't have the answer, I'm gonna give you the answer. The reason why that water does not have any lead in it, and why we go from the water that is put through those pipes by the government and the water that is in fact sold by the private sector, is that the private sector is based on a profit motive, and the other one is based upon taxation. And taxation is force.
They could deliver any kind of product they want because you have no recourse. They have no recourse because they can basically, they can do whatever they want to you if you don't pay,
That's exactly
pay their bill.
Doing. There's no incentive for them to, first of all, they're inept. Start out with that. They are not the most efficient persons. The people that go in government are not probably employable. And do you know of any field that you would want these politicians to go into, and what field are they qualified to go into? to do a more efficient job, what positions do you think they would have if they were not operating inside of the government, where inefficiency is par for the course? What other area would they go into? And if you notice it, when they step down, I was reading yesterday that Jeff Flake, Mia Love, some of these others, they already hiring in former members of the. Okay, we're getting ready to take a break, and we'll see the persons that listen to us on WFOV. We will see you on the other side of the break, and we'll see you in 4 minutes. We will, as always, continue what we're doing here at allpointstv.com, and we'll continue our discussion here. But what I was trying to say here was that you will always, in terms of the people that operate in government, you'll never see them go into private industry, or if they were not practicing something like medical doctors, for example, if they were not doing medical science before they became members of Congress, or if they were not lawyers, where lawyers are shakedown artists, if they were not lawyers before becoming politicians, you won't see them going to something other than those fields that they were in before they became politicians. When they go back to that, you never see them going in the industry, for example, setting up something that would employ people, because that's not where their credentials are. They're not qualified to run anything because they don't have those skills. Their skills are pretty much skills of oratory. They're good in terms of talking, how they come before the American people and they are selling your product, basically that the problems can be solved by electing them to power. And they can sell that, and they're good in terms of how they make things appear fixable through the political arena. And it's amazing that they can do that when there's no history to it, because government does not fix problems. Everything the government does, it does it through a political situation. Everything that is to be placed through a political filter, which all things are if you're a politician. Then those are trade-offs. The question is, you will do something over here to fix this politically. What happens as a result of that over here that was something that was broken because it was fixed over here? The robbing Peter to pay Paul type thing. So everything that is fixed, quote unquote, you have to borrow for something else to bring that result about, and it creates another problem that has to be fixed, therefore, by fixing the problem over here. And so we have these trade-offs in politics, and therefore nothing ever gets fixed in terms of the situation where we have, nirvana, we have utopia. The idea that government can, in fact, import goodwill and good welfare conditions and things of that sort. We can have government bring that result about. And I can tell you from looking at it through history, it's never happened in the history of the world. Government has never fixed a problem and made it better for the people. And whatever they fix, they're borrowing from somewhere else to bring it about, and therefore some other stuff gets undone, and therefore you have a breakage somewhere else. And so it's impossible to do it through government. And I would even contend, quite frankly, that all the problems that we're having in America right now, every major problem we have in this country right now can be attributed to some political act that's going on in this country in the past. And I looked at that, even from what I was talking with my wife about this morning. My wife was telling me that a multi-millionaire passed by some people that were living under they were standing under a roadway. You know how you have these overdrives, these bridges. Okay, you're back now from WFOV. We're glad to have you back. And there were some people out there in the cold, and a multimillionaire, a guy that's a multimillionaire, passed by them and saw they were out there in the cold. He came back, put them all inside of his SUV, carried them to a hotel, and paid their bills for a week. Now, what am I getting at here? I'm getting at the impulse of the American people to help each other. And we did that until the politicians came into it and took that out of the hands of the American people and placed it inside of government. And now government wants to do that for the benefits of having government do it by extracting those dollars that are being paid for Catholic Outreach, Salvation Army, you name these organizations that picked up the slack as neighbors were helping neighbors out. And before the government got involved and taking it out of their hands and placing it in the political hands of those that are running these government units, both on the local, state, and federal level. And you'll see that the American people were playing the role of the Good Samaritan, because our impulse is to help our fellow man and our fellow woman out. And government saw an opportunity to spread its influence, which means to expand its power base. And they took those things over, but not at some cost to us. And what is the cost to us? The cost is the breaking down of the relationships in the community so that the people that are living next door are not seen as your benefactors. They are seen as people to, in fact, feed on when they're not watching what you're doing, because you don't see the role they're playing in terms of helping you when you are in need. And that's a very different society, by the way, than the one that most of us that are in this age group that I'm in were raised in. We were raised in a community where the government did not have all of this overreach. So therefore, the communities were more safe. I was raised in a very poor community, didn't have any bars up. And I do remember, and I came out of a very poor neighborhood and very poor family, where our house was one in which we wanted something to eat before we went to school. They didn't have free breakfast programs at that point. And we wanted something to eat before school, and we would normally toast bread. We would toast bread and drink some coffee, and that would be a filler in the morning. But we wouldn't even have the bread money the night before. My mother would find a way to get 21 cents. And so the next morning, before the store opened up, they have the bread outside the store. And we would go up there, and they'd have all the things out before the store would open, because they're dropping it off at all the stores, and they would have it outside the store. We went up there to the store, took the bread out of the box, put the 21 cents in the box, and took the bread home. And before we left for school, we'd take the bread home and toast it, and we'd have toast and coffee. And people would walk by that money and buy those things outside. If they didn't pay for it, they wouldn't bother it. And I'm talking about in a very poor neighborhood. It would never even dawn on us. I never thought about it, to go up there and take the bread, snatch the bread, and go. Nobody was out there, but it never dawned on us to take the bread and not pay for the bread. So when I took that bread out of that bread box, I put that 21 cents in there. And people that walked by it, going to work, going to school, going wherever, never went in that box and took that money out and put it in their pocket, because it did not belong to them. And that's a very different community than we have right now. But why was that community different? It was because the community saw its neighbors outreaching to each other. And that outreach connected us to each other. And the government took that away from us as American people and placed it in Washington, D.C. And you still are doing that, but you don't see it's being done, because they have taken the money through the gun in the room. And there is a gun in the room. You just don't see the gun. Taxes is a gun situation. And although we don't see the gun, does not mean the gun is not being employed. And if you don't think the gun is in the room, you'll see it on the 15th because you will, in fact, know that you have to get those taxes in on time and take that money and deliver it to your masters. And what that does, and we don't always look at it and see what it portends in terms of the consequence of that, but what it does, it breaks down relationships inside of communities. And that's why a lot of people today are saying that they cannot recognize this country that they were born in, because it's not the same country they were born in. And who has caused it to be so different today than it was then? Those persons in Washington, D.C. are causing it. You know, I don't like to say this publicly, but we have an adversary in this country. And you can call it the deep state. You can call it the hidden government. You can call it the Illuminati. You can call it a lot of names you use for it. And many of these names are to try to convince ourselves that it's not happening here. Our government is different, that these people have our goodwill at heart. We want to believe that. We want to believe that somehow the exceptionalism of this country is our politicians. And I would say America is exceptional. But I would also say very quickly that none of it is owed to these politicians. There never has been. Not even the framers. I'm not talking about the framers as the theoreticians. They were great and exceptional as theoreticians. I'm not talking about them in that role. I'm talking about distinguishing them from the ones that put the theoreticals in place, and they were great. They were the greatest persons this country has produced. They're the only intellectuals this country has produced. I agree with Ayn Rand. Rand is exactly correct. They are the first and so far the last intellectuals that we've seen in this country. We don't have intellectuals in this country beyond that. But when you go read the Federalist Papers, for example, I can tell you right now, nobody in this country today, certainly not Alan Dershowitz, which I'll be talking about him a little bit later in this discussion, because I want to go back to some of the things he's. I brought one of the articles that he wrote. I have to tell you something. I am stunned by these people that are out here. I'm stunned by it. It's stunning. The people that are standing in front of us, and they don't just think we're stupid. They work on that. They work on the premise that we're stupid. But they broke these. I'm talking about these politicians breaking our relationships down. We had strong relationships in the past, but what were those relationships? The fact that your neighbor would be the ones that bring about the sustenance when you didn't have it for yourself. You could go next door and get it. What do you think would happen today if they did what they did when I was a child, where they went next door and said to anyone what was said to my family? I can remember the person that came to my house and knocked on the door. I don't think he's alive now, so I mentioned his name. His name was Wayne Porch. That was his name. And Donald Porch was his brother and some of the others in that family. And Mrs. Porch, their family was poorer than our family. And I remember Wayne Porch knocking on our door early in the morning. And his words were, "My mama told me to come over here and get a sandwich." And I didn't think too much of it because it was very natural for that to have happened in my neighborhood, as it was natural for me to go over next door and ask for a cup of flour or ask for some eggs, a couple of eggs, anything to make your food supply grow until you can get we got food from the government. They didn't give you the money, but they would help you with milk powder and egg powder, beans, rice, flour, cheese. They gave cheese out, pork and gravy, Spam. I guess you would call it lunch meat in a can with about 2 tons of salt in it. And you had to put about 4 or 5 slices of bread with it in order and cut it very thin so you get the salt level down so you could eat it. I think it's why a lot of people have heart and arteries right now, because I think there was something in that talking about the government water. Don't let the government, when the government's giving us our food, that was a problem also. And I'm glad now, at least when they give food out, they let you go to the store and get it rather than government divvying it out, because I think there were some things they were doing with the food supply for those persons that were poor, and all the illnesses that they had in terms of experimentation or what that food, government food, was in fact doing. But we were tied together as a community. We were a very tight-knit community. We were all poor, but there were no bars up in our community. So we were poor in terms of materialities were concerned. We were not poor in terms of spirit. We knew that we could count on our neighbors, and because we could count on our neighbors, it was unthinkable to break into their house. And I can remember my own house was one in which my house was like a thoroughfare from 62nd Street to 61st Street. So rather than going down the block and around and coming back up and going to the place they were going in the middle of the street on 61st Street, what they do is cut right through our yard. Our house was in the back of the yard and front of the yard. They come through the yard, go through the back of it into the alley and cut down that way, and they'd be in the area where they were going on the next street, and it was just like a thoroughfare. We didn't think anything of it. And when there was nobody at home, they walked through the yard all day, and nobody ever thought to divert their trek through the yard and then just divert their passage into the house, which we couldn't lock during the daytime anyway, or nighttime. We put a stick in the door, and the window was out, so all they had to do was put their head in there and take the stick out, and the door would fly open. And we didn't have the stick in the door in the place where the handle was. We didn't have a stick in the door to keep anybody out. We kept it to keep the door closed, because the wind would blow the door open. We weren't trying to keep our neighbors out, because if that were the case, well, they wouldn't have been out yet. They could have come in there. We were just trying to keep the wind from blowing the door open. We were more worried about the wind than we were our neighbors. And all I'm saying here, and this is verifiable by anyone that lived in those communities during that time period, we were poor, but we were not poor in spirit, and we were not broken either, because we knew that the community had our back, not the government. And now people can't believe they can't do without government, because they have sold the idea that they're relevant, and they were not intended to be relevant. I will give the framers credit for that. They understood, if nothing else, they understood human nature. And they tried their best in writing a constitution that would restrain these people. And they were restrained for a period of time. But let me read something to you here on page 169, I think it is. 179. Let me read something to you here from, this is a book written by De Lorenzo, one of my favorite writers, Thomas De Lorenzo. And he has a book called Hamilton's Curse. Alexander Hamilton. He's talking about Alexander Hamilton, the first Secretary of the Treasury. And if anybody thinks that, now Alexander Hamilton is one of the framers. He wrote 51 of the Federalist Papers. And somebody should, I think Alan Dershowitz, you should read you should read Federalist Papers 64 and 65 about the impeachment that Alexander Hamilton wrote, because you don't understand it, and you need to go back and read what he wrote and see what's in that part of the 85 Federalist Papers 64 and 65, which deals with impeachment. Or you can read it in the Constitution, which you misread it in the Constitution, and read the three parts there. But here's what what Alexander Hamilton, this is what De Lorenzo is talking about with Alexander Hamilton. And he's saying the name of the book is it's called Hamilton's Curse. He says on page 179, Americans today, Americans today, 2019, Americans today no longer live under a constitution at all. That is very profound when you think about that. Americans today no longer live under a constitution at all. He's not the only one that said that. Napolitano's book called The Constitution in Exile, E-X-I-L-E, The Constitution in Exile, how the federal government has seized power by rewriting the supreme law of the land. And they've rewritten it to the point where it no longer even exists. We're not living under the Constitution in this country anymore. It's exactly what Alcee Hastings said, the representative from Florida, and they are in our face right now with it, and they dare us to do anything about it. Alcee Hastings said 3 or 4 years ago, and he was bragging about it, the representative from Florida, the man who was, by the way, impeached as a federal judge in Florida. He was impeached and he's removed from office. He was set down as a federal judge. They charged him with a crime, and because they charged him with a crime and convicted him of the crime, then the Constitution requires, as a federal office holder, under Article 2, Section 4, it requires a removal from office once the office holder is impeached and removed from office upon the charge of high crimes and misdemeanors. And because he was impeached and convicted, he was forced to step down. But then Alcee Hastings decided to, in fact, run for the House of Representatives, and now he is a part of the group that impeached him. Still corrupt. And he said to the American people, in a braggadocious way, he said, the law is what we say it is. So when it says here on page 179 of DeLorenzo's book, Hamilton's Curse, Americans today no longer live under a constitution at all, he's not saying anything that others have not said. Let me read this to you. Let me read this. This is in another one of DeLorenzo's book. It's called It is Dangerous to Be Right When the Government is Wrong. And on page 263 of this book, Napolitano makes this comment to show you how criminal this thing has gotten and why we're so broken down in our relationships in this country and how we are now tearing each other apart. All of what we see going on right now can be explained through this government overreach. Everything. Napolitano says government rejects its moral and legal obligations. I don't think government really has a moral obligation. I don't see. I don't think we can expect, unless government is run by angels. I mean, that would contradict Thomas Jefferson's words that if men were angels, they would not need government. And if government was run by angels, we would not need a constitution. So this idea of morality, I don't get into the moral claims against the leadership. They're not moral. They've never been moral. They've always been Attila. So you can take that to the bank. You're not going to have moral leadership. It's not going to happen. And you've never seen it on the planet. And that goes back to the Republic by Plato. Plato was talking about these philosopher kings. You know, we're going to have these philosophers now. That's what we had in our. By the way, that's what we had in our country. We had these great philosophers, the greatest philosophers. They weren't all. I mean, they weren't all here, but they were quoting great philosophers: John Locke, Rousseau. Later on, these were great philosophers in the 18th and 19th century. And they pulled from these great philosophers. And so we had great philosophers in this country. Thomas Jefferson. They were pulling these ideas from the great thinkers of the world at that time. And they were tremendous. But I'm not talking about that when they started to rule as politicians. I mean, I'm looking at, I read this, when I read this book by De Lorenzo called Hamilton's Curse, I read it in the smaller version, but I read the much larger version of it as well, written by this great biographer named Ron Chernow. And I'm going to tell you, when he wrote that book, which is a scholar, I don't think this is too scholarly, but it makes the point how dangerous Alexander Hamilton was. And in fact, we are living in Hamilton's country right now. This is Hamilton's country. This is not the country of Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. In fact, that's what the fight was about. And you can go back and read a lot of it from, I would suggest you read it from De Lorenzo's book, because in Chernow's book, there's so much detail in Chernow's work that you're going to be there for a while. Everything he writes is 700 pages. He's done some great biographies. And each one I read, it's kept me there for a week and a half, 2 weeks, because it's so complex. But the point that he makes, that he's making in this book, and also what Ron Chernow does in his book, he shows that Hamilton is the driving force. Much of what's wrong with the country right now is because of Alexander Hamilton. But if you look at Alexander Hamilton as a theoretician, you can't do anything with what he wrote. Go read, for those of you looking at the president right now, there's word about if he goes and executes that wall through executive power, fearful that the Ninth Circuit Court will overturn and tell the president that he cannot in fact do that, and the president will in fact act like he cannot do it because of the court telling him cannot do it. That is really amazing to me. When I read, don't tell me, when I read Federalist Paper 78, oh, it's there. Go read Federalist Paper 78. That's written by Alexander Hamilton also, where Hamilton said this in the Federalist Paper 78. And if it's not there, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll take the book written by De Lorenzo next week, and right before the camera, I'll eat it on camera. I won't be eating it, by the way. It's exactly where I said it is. And I'm coming to this jerk, Alan Dershowitz, in a minute. Because the problem we have right now is government overreach, and also we being taught by fools. And that combination right there has led us to a dead end. And we are at the edges right now. That's run by our intellectuals, quote unquote intellectuals, our scholars. They're not intellectuals, they're scholars. They read a few books, and from what I'm saying about what they're saying about what they read, they are illiterate. Nobody can read the Constitution and conclude what these clowns are saying. These are clowns. I'm gonna read something. I hope we have enough time to do it. I want to read something from. And I may have to read it next week. I'm not sure if I have
you got about 1.5, 2 minutes.
Yeah, I'll read it next week. But next week when I come to the studio, I want to read what Alan Dershowitz said in an article. And I'll tell you what the name of the article is. You can go and get it for next week, and we'll do this next week. There's an article, and it's Dershowitz. Rosenstein impeachment, quote, short-sighted, unquote, and stupid. So I'll be reading from that article next week with Alan Dershowitz. But in De Lorenzo's book, I was getting ready to quote this a minute ago when I wanted to get to this point about government being out of control and why it's one of the what is the major place where we have all of these problems now being poured into our society by the government overreach from Washington, D.C. they're doing things they should not be doing, and we're not even constituted to do based upon the Constitution. But they've thrown that away. This has been thrown out of. We don't live in the Constitution anymore. We're in a post-constitutional America. But De Lorenzo says government rejects its moral and legal obligations. It has legal obligations, not moral obligations. Insulates itself from litigation, breaks its own laws, makes its own rules, declares worthless paper, that currency in your pocket, worthless paper, to be money. It's not money, it's currency. There's no money. And then, on top of all of those things it does about money, it then devalues that. And then devalues even that. Government will not hesitate to use force upon those who challenge it. Government has made it unlawful to resist its uses of force, even when those uses are patently and unconditionally wrong. And I dare anyone to take that and then go read the book by the two Kennedy brothers from North Carolina, The South Was Right, and you'll see why they are declaring that. Because this was part of what they were fighting against, this government overreach. Okay, it's dangerous to be right when the government is wrong. They are wrong in almost everything they're doing. And we are going to have to understand where we are right now, because we are at a critical moment in our history. And we've got to get past this if we're going to save this country, because we're a critical mass right now. Okay, I will be back next week, and I will start off by talking about the impeachment process, which is now beginning to flood the market with the ideas of impeaching Donald Trump and getting him out of there, and so on and so forth. Okay, I got to run. Until next week, I want you to follow your dream, because if you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.